And I want to tell you the story of how this ministry began. It is truly a phenomenal story. I have never told it publicly before. The only venues in which I have told it is when I am trying to start a small support group for pastors, and when I have been, our regional directors had our retreat in Florida last winter. I had the privilege of telling it to the pastors in those small groups. And then in May in Western Michigan, where I had the privilege of telling it. And the board, the regional directors and I have been on a 3-day retreat. They all flew in, and we all scattered to the four winds tomorrow morning. And when they heard me say, I am going to tell it in 8 minutes, they laughed. It normally takes about 30, but I'm only going to give you just the very heart of the whole thing. I want you to understand how God does things. I'm going to share a couple of things that some of you, it may stretch you just a little bit, but we have to understand how big God is and the ways in which He works. I had been pastor here for 20 years when I received a letter in the mail one day, and the essence of the letter said, because you are viewed as one of the spiritual leaders in New England, we are inviting you to come to a meeting with others of us where we want to discuss and strategize how we can bring revival into New England. I didn't know what there was about the letter, but I didn't like it. I read it, and something about it turned me off, and I threw it in the wastebasket. And then immediately, something inside, the Holy Spirit, said, no, it wasn't words as such, but it was such a clear impression. I knew it was the Lord. Said, pick it up. I picked it up, read it a second time, didn't like it any better than the first time. And I heard in my spirit the Lord say, you are to go. So then I threw it away. I wish now I never had. The day came for that meeting. I had to drive from the old church site straight east on 135 through 5 towns. Pulled out onto Main Street going east, and this thought came into my mind. Don't you think I have any other servant leaders who love me and desire to see my glory in this community? And I didn't give it any thought. I thought, oh, that's a weird thought. Seriously, that's what I thought. That's weird. And just, chucked it. I crossed over into Ashland. Hardly got across the town line driving east, and the thought came back a second time, the very same thought, and I said, darn it, it's stuck in my mind. It's like one of those ditties. You get a little musical ditty and you can't get rid of it. That's what I thought it was. Just some weird thing, I couldn't get rid of it. And then I crossed into the third town, Framingham, and the same thing came to me again. And now I'm beginning to say, okay, something's going on. And I said, in essence, to the Lord, I think you're trying to tell me something. I don't have the foggiest notion what it is. Crossed into Natick, very same thing. Crossed into Wellesley, in the town in which the church was being held, the meeting was being held at a church there. Pull into the parking lot of the church, and by now this thing is just ringing in my ears practically. And I'm saying, I know you're talking to me. I don't understand what you're saying. I walked into the place, the room where the meeting was being held. And there were about 21, 22 pastors there. Most of them I knew. There were 1 or 2 I didn't. And they were, for the most part, whom I expected to be at a meeting like that. And I'm sitting there not wanting to be there. And so I'm just listening to them talk back and forth about, how can we work to pull revival off in New England? And all of a sudden, now this is where it will get hairy for some of you. All of a sudden, the Lord spoke to me, and He said, I want you to speak. And He gave me 3 things to say, just like that. And so I said, I didn't say the Lord told me to tell you this yet. I just said, I need to say something. And then it just started coming out of my mouth. And the first thing I said was, God would like to ask you a question. He would like to know who feels they have the authority to determine who His spiritual leaders in New England are. He thought that belonged to Him. And it was just stunned. And I went on to say to them, and I wasn't being arrogant, I was just being obedient. It was just there. And I went on to say, and I meant it, in all honesty, I do not consider myself a spiritual leader in New England. I'm not known in a lot of New England. I have a successful pastoral ministry. My church is growing, but that doesn't make me a spiritual leader. So God would like to know who feels they have the authority to determine who his spiritual leaders are. And then a second thing came. And I told him, I said, God also wants me to tell you this. He is not going to bless this because he's not in it. And by now, there's just utter silence in the room. And then he gave me a third thing to say. I said, God has said to me, he wants us all to go back to our communities and reach out to servant leaders of his. And that's the phrase that was in my mind. And I've used that so much since then. A reference to pastors, but servant leaders. He wants us to go back to our own communities and reach out to servant leaders he has there whom we don't know or are not familiar with, who would never get invited to a meeting like this, and build relationship with them, come together in small groups, get to know each other, support and encourage each other, and pray for revival. He told me he would bless that. And it all stopped. And I sat down. And the room was just dead silent. Nobody knew what to say. And I didn't have anything else to say because I wasn't going to say anything. And then someone said, we have coffee and donuts downstairs. and I got up and I said, I'm out of here. I'm not going down there. So I beat it right out to my car and I'm driving back home. And then, it hits me. And I said to myself, okay, Dick, you opened your mouth and put your big fat foot in it. You told them God said to do this. What are you going to do about it? And so when I got back, I started assessing churches around me. I discovered that there were pastors that, Gordon, a seminary graduate, same seminary as mine, about 8 minutes from me. He'd been in this church 9 years. We had never met. Never even met. I sent a letter out to 5 pastors and said to them, if you're dissatisfied with the quality of your relationship with Christ and the work of the Holy Spirit in your life and ministry, will you have lunch with me? Let's talk about that. And I got 3 others who responded affirmatively. Now, there was one guy at this meeting in Wellesley. Are any of Connect Church's people here tonight? Oh, okay, great. There's Brian Jamross, and with you is Matt Zimmerman. Right. Okay. And, oh yeah, Joan, that's right. And Julie. Right. Okay, anyway, the senior pastor at that time was Ernie Fry. We were 9 minutes apart. Ernie and I had never met. He had been there for years. I'd been in this church for 20 years at that time. I considered him a wild-eyed charismatic, really. And he thought I was not a Christian because how could I be a true Christian and be in a United Church of Christ church? He was at that meeting. First time he and I had ever laid eyes on each other. And we didn't know who the other was until we'd gone around first and, just introduced ourselves. And I looked and I said, oh, so that's him, huh? Well, I did not invite him to this meeting because I thought he would never come. Before I had that luncheon meeting with those guys, my phone rang one day. I pick it up, Dick Germain here, and the voice on the other end says, this is Ernie Fry. And I was stunned. I thought, uh-oh, what have I done? What's he want? He said, are you going to do what you told us God told us to do? I said, yes, I am. I'm trying to form the group now. He said, I want in. And that's how the first John 17:23 group began. The 5 of us got together for lunch. We were as disparate as could be. Ernie was charismatic. Mike O'Brien was a Foursquare pastor. Jim Andrews had been a hippie, was won to Christ in the Jesus movement on the West Coast, and was pastoring a small congregation in this town of former hippies. Jim Andrews was a United Methodist pastor. And then there was I, and by that time in my life and ministry around here, nobody knew what to do with Dick Germain anyway. They didn't know what to call me anymore or anything, because I just wasn't showing up where they expected me to. The five of us committed ourselves to each other for 9 months. Every third Thursday morning, we said we have got to meet for every third Thursday morning for 9 months. We have to know, what does God want to do with us? And in those 9 months, barriers came down, relationships were built, volumes of tears were shed, encouragement, acceptance, love, counsel was given. At the end of the 9 months, we all said, I have to have this in my life. And we became permanently the first John 17:23 group.